Thanks, Craig. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to talk to you about my research and specifically talk to you about inflammation and in the brain and the role that plants can play in helping to treat it. And so I think the best way to start is just to touch on the fact that over the past year, there hasn't been a day that goes by that we don't hear something about the immune system, inflammation, or immunity, be it on the radio, television, social media, and on the news. And here are just some of the words you may have come across in the past year relating to this broad topic. And we know that inflammation is the immune system's way of fighting or defending the body against disease and infection. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about specific inflammation in the brain. And this hasn't been as well known, say, in recent years as it was about the body, because we knew very little. The brain is a very complex part of the body. And if we take, for example, looking at a cut or an infection you get in your knee, say dirt gets in, it causes an infection, and your body will respond by sending immune cells to the area. Now, you won't see this under the surface, but on the surface, you will see a lot of changes. So your cut will be inflamed, sore, it will feel quite hot and quite red and swollen. But when we get injury or infection in our brains, we can't see or feel it. Therefore, it has made it more difficult to investigate and study. But thanks to technology and very powerful microscopes, we have been able to look inside the brain. And we now know that the brain is made up of billions of nerve cells called neurons. And these neurons carry out a lot of the major functions that we associate with the brain. So our thinking and memory, our emotion, and other functions of the brain. But there are also specific immune cells in the brain. And these cells are known as microglial cells. They only make up about 7 to 10% of the cells in the brain, but what they lack for in numbers, they more than make up for in the roles that they carry out, the important jobs that they do on a daily basis. So some of these roles that they carry out is that they are quite active cells in terms of moving about and surveying the environment. And they have these branch-like arms that come out from their cell body, and it allows them to detect any changes that might be happening in the brain's environment and also communicate with other cells. So when they do detect a change, be it from an infection, an injury, maybe a toxic substance in the brain, they initially respond by changing shape, and they change to this more circular structure. They then move to the site of injury or infection, and like immune cells in the body, they respond by releasing these inflammatory substances that help deal with the damage. And then they clear up debris that could be in the form of dead cells. But let's back to the inflammation in your knee. Over time, we expect that this inflammation will go away, the damage will be repaired. But what if it doesn't? What if inflammation persists? Then the function of our knee will be affected in the long term if it is experiencing constant inflammation. And the same can happen in the brain, and this is called neuroinflammation. So if we take these microglial immune cells and they detect something strange happening in the brain from maybe bacteria or a toxic protein, they then become switched on when they detect it, and they respond by releasing these inflammatory substances, which we hope they will then repair the healthy nerve cells, and the damage will be repaired. But if they build up and too many inflammatory substances get released, they build up in toxic forms, and this can end up causing more damage than good, and nerve cells can end up dying if too many of these inflammatory substances start to build up. And so this process of neuroinflammation occurs as we age. In the older brain, it is a sign of the aging brain, but it can get enhanced or exaggerated in many brain diseases. So researchers have shown that neuroinflammation, where the microglial cells are constantly switched on, can happen in Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and Huntington's disease. So it's a key characteristic of these brain disorders. And so in these cases, the conditions of the brain, the environment is inflamed, and it can exacerbate or increase the damage. And the idea is that if we could use some compounds that are anti-inflammatory, so maybe restore the brain's environment to more normal levels, that it could help with the treatment of these disorders. And thankfully, nature has given us the tools to do so. So when it comes to switching to green, cannabidiol, or CBD, as it's more commonly known as, has really stolen the show in this regard. So CBD is a component of the cannabis plant. It has medicinal properties, and it doesn't give the high that's associated with other components of the plant. And it's really taken over the mainstream media by storm. Similar to inflammation and the immune system in the past year, CBD has also made its way to our social media. So it is shown its most promising effects as a treatment for childhood epilepsy, as cannabidiol was approved for use in the UK and US as an epilepsy drug or treatment. Researchers are also looking at whether it can help in the treatment of dementia and Parkinson's disease, also for its use for anxiety or depressive-like symptoms, and it's even found its way into our skincare products. But while CBD is leading the way in this area, there are also other cannabis-based drugs out there. And so this is where my research comes into play. Cannabis plant compounds are scientifically known as phytocannabinoids. Phyto coming from the word plant and cannabinoid from cannabis. And the interesting thing is that this plant has over 100 individual compounds identified from it. But many of these remain poorly investigated to date. So they're lesser explored than cannabidiol, and we don't know that much about some of them. And this is where I have begun working in the lab, and what I am investigating is these relatively unknown phytocannabinoid compounds to see what effects they have. So what I'm doing in the lab is I was looking at a range of these cannabis-based compounds, and I was testing them out on my microglial cells. So I grow the microglial immune cells initially in these flasks. When they grow up to big enough numbers, I can then transfer them to a plate. I can leave them for a day to grow and get settled. And then I treat them with an inflammatory drug that acts like bacteria. And this drug causes the cells to become switched on or activated. So they start to experience this neuroinflammation. And then I go in with the plant-based compounds, these phytocannabinoids, to see what effect they have. And so again, if we look at this process, the microglial cells start to release their inflammatory substances when they detect the bacteria. And I have looked at two compounds in particular, or I found two in particular that have reduced the amount of inflammatory substances that the cells release. And so we would hope then that it wouldn't be toxic to the nerve cells. And so to look at my results in a little bit more detail, I am measuring substances called cytokines, and this is the term used to describe these inflammatory substances. And when the microglial cells are carrying out their normal everyday activities, they release little or no levels of these cytokines. However, when I treat them with the bacteria-like drug, they significantly increase the amount that they release. And this is when the microglial cells become switched on or activated. And this is what we don't want. But when I then add my phytocannabinoid compounds, I see that the levels are reduced. And the next question that I'm currently working on in the lab, so 2 out of the kind of range of compounds I've looked at have shown the most promise. And I want to see how these work. So how do they carry out these anti-inflammatory effects in the cell? What ways are they doing this? And so I hope then that the work that I have done and the research carried out by other scientists could lay the foundations in the hope that there will be a development of anti-inflammatory drugs that are plant-based. We could use them then to treat neuroinflammation with the hope of using it in line with other medicines for the likes of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. And so with that, I would just like to acknowledge the people in my lab group who've helped me with my project, other colleagues in UCD, and friends and family who've been listening to this talk on a number of occasions and have helped me. So thank you very much, and best of luck to the rest of the speakers tonight. Thank you.